I have stood watch for 8,000 years. 8,000 years. Do you understand what that means? Can you even conceptualize that span of time? Empires rise and fall in less. Species evolve and go extinct. Stars are born and die. The very geology of planets shifts and transforms. And I have been standing here, in this corridor, wearing this golden armor, holding this guardian spear, for all of it. My name is Aristeos. I am a Custodian Guard, one of the 10,000, the Adeptus Custodes. I am the Emperor's personal guardian, genetically perfected, trained from childhood to be the finest warrior humanity has ever produced. I was there at the Siege of Terra. I stood on the walls when Horus's forces crashed against them like a tide of corruption and madness. I fought demons in the Imperial Palace itself, cut down traitor Astartes in the throne room's approaches. I was there when the Emperor faced Horus on the vengeful spirit. I wasn't on the ship. That honor went to others. But I was there in the aftermath. I saw him when they brought him back. I saw the Emperor of mankind, the master of humanity, the greatest being ever to walk among us, reduced to a broken corpse, barely clinging to life. I watched as they installed him on the golden throne, watched as the machinery locked into place, watched as 10,000 psychers were fed into the mechanism to keep him alive. I have stood watch ever since. 8,000 years of service, 8,000 years of loyalty, 8,000 years of standing in corridors and chambers and halls, guarding a palace that has become a mausoleum, protecting an emperor who will never wake, serving an Imperium that has become everything he warned us against. And I cannot retire, I cannot rest, I cannot die. I am immortal. Not truly. We custodians can be killed, and some of my brothers have fallen over the millennia. But barring violence, barring some catastrophic injury, I will live forever. My body does not age, my mind does not decay. The genetic engineering that created me, the modifications that made me more than human, they sustain me indefinitely. I am 30 years old biologically. I have been 30 years old for 8,000 years. And I will be 30 years old for 8,000 more, and 8,000 after that, until the end of time itself, or until something finally kills me. This is not a gift. This is a curse. This is my reality. This is what it means to be a Custodian Guard who can never retire. I remember when I was chosen. I was a child, 6 years old, maybe 7. They came to my family's hab unit on Terra. My family was noble, distantly connected to one of the ancient bloodlines that the Imperium values. They performed their tests. Genetic compatibility, psychological resilience, physical potential. I passed. My parents wept with pride. They thought their son was being elevated, honored, given the greatest opportunity any human could receive. They didn't understand. They couldn't understand. I was taken to the Imperial Palace, to the halls beneath the palace, to the training grounds and laboratories where custodians are made. I was subjected to procedures that rewrote my very DNA, surgeries that rebuilt my body from the cellular level up, conditioning that stripped away everything I had been and rebuilt me as something new. I don't remember my parents' faces. I don't remember my family's name. I don't remember anything about the child I was before the transformation. That child died in the laboratories. What emerged was Aristeo, Custodian Guard, one of the 10,000. I was trained for decades. Combat techniques that took years to master. Tactical doctrine, strategic thinking, history and philosophy and the Emperor's vision for humanity. We were taught that we were the pinnacle of human achievement, the ultimate expression of what mankind could become. We were perfect. We were unbreakable. We were tools. That's what we are. That's what we've always been. Tools, forged for a single purpose, to protect the Emperor. Not to think, not to question, not to live, just to protect. And I have done my duty. For 8,000 years I have done my duty. But duty is cold comfort when you've been doing it for millennia with no end in sight. The first 1,000 years were the easiest. In the immediate aftermath of the heresy, we were still united by purpose. The Emperor had fallen, yes, but his vision lived on. We would rebuild. We would continue his great crusade. We would shepherd humanity toward the future he had planned. Guilliman took control, established the Codex Astartes, reorganized the Imperium. We custodians remained in the palace, as always, but we believed the work was being done. The dream was being fulfilled. I stood my post, and I believed. The second 1,000 years were harder. The Imperium was fracturing. The High Lords of Terror were consolidating power, building bureaucracies, establishing the ecclesiarchy despite the Emperor's explicit rejection of religious faith. We custodians watched from within the palace as his vision was twisted, corrupted, transformed into something he would have despised. But we said nothing. We did nothing, because our duty was to guard the Emperor, not to govern the Imperium. That was not our role. I stood my post, and I remained silent. The third 1,000 years were when I started to doubt. The imperial cult had become the dominant force in the Imperium. The Emperor was worshipped as a god. His message of reason and science and enlightenment had been completely buried beneath layers of superstition and dogma. The Mechanicus hoarded technology instead of innovating. The Inquisition burned anyone who thought differently. The Administratum drowned progress in paperwork. Everything he had worked for, everything he had built, was being dismantled piece by piece and replaced with exactly the kind of ignorant theocracy he had spent his life fighting against. And we custodians stood in the palace and did nothing. I stood my post, and I began to hate. Do you know what it's like to watch something die slowly? Not a person. A person dies quickly, relatively speaking. Even if they linger for years, it's nothing compared to the lifespan of a civilization. No, I'm talking about watching an entire culture, an entire vision of humanity's future, die across millennia. The Imperium is dying. It's been dying for 8,000 years, and I've watched every moment of it. I've watched the technology degrade. Weapons and ships and systems that used to be standard issue become rare relics, their construction methods lost, their principles forgotten. The Mechanicus worships machines instead of understanding them. They pray to spirits instead of repairing circuitry. I've watched the military decline. The Space Marines are shadows of the legions they came from. The Imperial Guard throws bodies at problems instead of applying strategy. The Navy loses ships it can't replace. I've watched the culture rot. The Imperium used to value knowledge, merit, achievement. Now it values faith, obedience, suffering. Entire worlds are kept in deliberate ignorance because educated populations are harder to control. I've watched humanity give up on its own potential. And the worst part? I remember what it used to be like. I remember the Emperor's vision. I was there when he spoke of a future where humanity would dominate the galaxy through reason and strength, where superstition would be eradicated, where every human would reach their full potential. I remember believing in that vision. I remember thinking we were building something glorious. Now I stand in a palace that has become a cathedral, guarding a man who has become a god, serving an empire that has become a theocratic nightmare. And I cannot leave. I cannot speak out. I cannot do anything but stand watch. Because I am a custodian, and custodians do not question, custodians do not doubt, custodians do not retire. We serve forever. My brothers die occasionally. In battle, usually. Sometimes in training accidents, though that's rare. We are too perfect to make mistakes easily. When a custodian falls, we hold no ceremony. We take no moment of silence. We simply note the loss, redistribute the duties, and continue serving. There is no time for grief. There is only duty. I envy them, the fallen ones, I mean. They got to stop. Their service ended. They gave their lives in defense of the Emperor, and now they rest. They don't have to stand watch anymore. They don't have to witness the ongoing decay. They don't have to pretend that everything is fine when it's clearly not. They're free. I've been in 17 major engagements over the past 8,000 years. Battles where the palace itself was threatened, where forces breached the outer walls or teleported into the inner sanctums. Chaos warbands, gene-stealer cults, rogue Imperial forces, even a splinter of a Tyranid hive fleet once. I killed hundreds of enemies in each battle, thousands, across all of them combined. I fought with perfect precision, perfect efficiency. I executed my duty flawlessly. And I survived every single one. My armor is covered in kill markings, tiny inscriptions, each one representing a worthy opponent slain. There are thousands of them. My guardian spear has tasted the blood of traitor space marines, daemon princes, Xenos overlords, and corrupted heroes. I am a legend among legends. New custodians look at me with awe. The Imperium's military commanders speak my name with reverence. And all I feel is tired. I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of standing watch. I'm tired of existing in this state of perfect stasis while the galaxy burns around me. But I cannot stop, because I am a custodian, and custodians serve until they fall. I just wish I would fall. I wish one of those battles had been my last. I wish I had died 8,000 years ago, when I still believed in what we were fighting for. But I didn't. I survived. And I will continue to survive because my genetic enhancements make me almost impossible to kill, because my training makes me too skilled to fall easily, because my duty requires me to endure. This is my curse. Not mortality, immortality. The palace is vast beyond comprehension, continent-sized. Cities exist within its walls. Millions of people live and work here. Servants, scribes, administrators, priests, soldiers. I know every corridor, every hall, every chamber. I've walked them for 8,000 years. I've stood guard in thousands of locations. I've memorized the architecture, the layouts, the patterns of traffic and duty rotations. The palace never changes. Oh, sections are renovated sometimes. Decorations are updated. New wings are added. But the fundamental structure remains the same golden walls, the same marble floors, the same vaulted ceilings that disappear into shadow above. It's beautiful. It was designed to be beautiful, to inspire awe and reverence in all who see it, and it does. Visitors from across the Imperium come here and weep at the majesty of it all. I just see a prison, because that's what it is. For me, at least. A golden cage that I will never leave. I could, technically. Custodians do occasionally venture outside the palace on missions, but those are rare. Most of us spend our entire existence within these walls. I haven't seen the sky in 6,000 years. I haven't felt wind on my face, or rain, or natural sunlight. I haven't walked on soil or grass. I haven't heard the sound of waves or the call of birds. I exist in artificial environment, breathing recycled air, lit by artificial lights, surrounded by stone and metal and gold. I am the Emperor's guardian. I am the pinnacle of human achievement. I am perfection incarnate. And I am trapped. There's a moment that haunts me, a memory from 7,000 years ago, early in the Imperium's decline. I was stationed in one of the observation galleries, a chamber with massive windows overlooking the palace grounds. A new custodian had just completed his final trials and was taking his first posting. He stood beside me, silent and perfect in his new armor. And then he spoke. "It's beautiful," he said, looking out at the palace. I didn't respond. I'd learned by then not to engage unnecessarily. But he continued, "I never imagined anything could be this magnificent. To think, we get to guard this. We get to protect the Emperor himself. What greater honor could exist?" I looked at him. He was young, relatively speaking, perhaps 80 years old, most of that spent in training. His eyes were bright with faith and purpose. I envied him. He still believed. He still saw the beauty and missed the decay. "How long have you served?" he asked me. 1,347 years, I replied. He nodded, awed. "You must have seen so much. So many battles. So many threats turned aside." "Yes," I said, "because what else could I say?" He smiled. "I hope I serve as long as you. I hope I'm worthy of standing watch for millennia." I wanted to tell him the truth. I wanted to tell him that serving for millennia means watching everything you believe in crumble, means standing in one place while the galaxy tears itself apart, means losing every shred of hope and purpose and replacing it with nothing but hollow duty. I wanted to tell him to pray for a quick death instead, but I didn't. Because I am a custodian, and custodians do not spread doubt. We do not weaken resolve. We serve in silence, and we endure. "May the Emperor guide you," I said instead. He nodded, satisfied, and returned to his contemplation of the palace. I never saw him again. I don't know if he's still alive, or if he fell in battle, or if he's standing watch somewhere else in the palace, slowly losing his faith, the same way I lost mine. I hope he died quickly. I hope he never had to learn what I've learned. I hope he got to keep believing. The golden throne sits at the heart of the palace, deep beneath layers of protection and sanctification. It's a massive mechanism, part technology and part arcane sorcery, keeping the Emperor's broken body alive, sustaining his psychic presence so he can power the Astronomicon and hold shut the webway breach beneath the palace. I've stood guard in the throne room itself hundreds of times over the millennia. Different rotations, different posts, but always the same duty. Watch the approaches, ensure no threat reaches him, maintain absolute vigilance. Every time I stand there, I have to confront the reality of what we're protecting. The Emperor is not alive, not in any meaningful sense. His body is a desiccated husk, barely held together by the throne's mechanisms. His mind, if it still exists in a coherent form, is fragmented across the Imperium, fighting battles we cannot see, holding back horrors we cannot comprehend. He cannot speak, he cannot guide, he cannot lead. We are guarding a corpse, a holy, necessary, impossibly important corpse, but a corpse nonetheless. And the Imperium worships it. I remember when he walked among us, when he spoke and we listened, when he gave orders and we obeyed because we believed in his vision, when he was a person, not a god, not a symbol, but a being of incomprehensible power and wisdom who nonetheless seemed almost human. I remember his voice, deep and resonant, carrying absolute authority, but also warmth, conviction, purpose. He didn't just command, he inspired. He made you believe that humanity could be better, could be greater, could reach heights undreamed of. I remember the last time I saw him conscious, the day before he faced Horus. He walked through the palace's halls, and we custodians lined the way. He paused before each of us, meeting our eyes, acknowledging us individually. When he reached me, he stopped. He looked at me for a long moment, and I felt as though he was seeing through me, seeing every thought, every doubt, every fear I'd ever had. And then he spoke. "Thank you, Aristeas, for your service, for your loyalty, for your sacrifice." Those were the last words the Emperor ever spoke to me. I have replayed that moment in my mind 10,000 times over the past 8,000 years. I've analyzed every word, every inflection, every possible meaning. Did he know? Did he know he was walking to his doom? Did he know that he would never return from the vengeful spirit as himself? Did he know that we would be guarding his corpse for millennia, watching his dream die? Did he thank me because he understood what he was asking of us? I'll never know. He's been silent ever since. The throne room is never empty. There are always priests here, chanting prayers and performing rituals. There are always tech priests monitoring the throne's mechanisms, feeding in psychers, making constant adjustments to keep everything functional. And there are always custodians standing watch. We don't speak. We don't move unless necessary. We simply stand, golden statues in the half-light, guarding the Emperor in his eternal dying. And I've stood watch with the same custodians dozens of times over the centuries. Brothers I've served alongside for millennia. We know each other's combat styles, tactical preferences, even the small personal quirks that persist despite our conditioning. But I don't know their thoughts. I don't know if they doubt like I do. I don't know if they've lost their faith, or if they still believe, or if they're simply numb. We never discuss it. We never discuss anything beyond immediate tactical necessities. Because loyalty is absolute, doubt is not permitted. To voice uncertainty about our purpose would be betrayal. So we stand in silence, each of us alone with our thoughts, surrounded by brothers who might as well be strangers. There's a custodian named Memnon who I've stood watch with perhaps 50 times over the past 3,000 years. He's older than me. He was inducted before the heresy even began, one of the original 10,000 who stood watch when the Emperor still walked. I fought beside him in 4 major battles. He saved my life once, stepping into the path of a plasma blast meant for me during a chaos incursion. His armor absorbed the hit, and he killed the heretic a moment later. I've never thanked him. I've never acknowledged the debt, because that's not how we operate. We do our duty, we protect each other. We don't form bonds or friendships or attachments. But sometimes, when we're both posted in the Sanctum Imperialis, standing on opposite sides of the vast hall, I find myself wondering about him. Does he remember the Emperor as I do? Does he compare what we have now to what we had then? Does he lie awake? Do any of us truly sleep anymore? And question whether this is what we were made for? Or has he found some kind of peace, some way to reconcile the reality of our existence with the purpose we were given? I want to ask him. I've wanted to ask him for 1,000 years, but I never will. Because to ask would be to admit doubt, and to admit doubt would be to fail in my duty. So I stand in silence, and he stands in silence, and we guard the Emperor's corpse together, 2 immortals who will never speak of the burden we carry. New custodians are still created. The process hasn't stopped, even after 8,000 years. The Imperium takes children, subjects them to the same procedures I underwent, forges them into new guardians for the Emperor. They arrive in the palace, fresh and zealous, their minds filled with propaganda and faith. They believe in the God Emperor with absolute conviction. They see the Imperium as the greatest human achievement in history. They view their selection as the highest honor imaginable. I hate them, not because of who they are, they're victims just like I was, but because they remind me of what I've lost. That faith, that certainty, that sense of purpose and meaning. They look at veterans like me with reverence. They see our kill markings, our centuries of service, our perfect records, and they aspire to be like us. They don't understand that we're not aspirational. We're cautionary tales. I remember a new custodian named Theron who was assigned to my section about 200 years ago. He approached me after his first watch, his demeanor respectful but eager. "Brother Aristeas," he said, "I've studied your combat records. Your defense of the Eternity Gate during the Celestial Incursion was masterful. The way you held that choke point against 17 traitor Astartes—" "It was duty," I interrupted, "nothing more. He nodded, undeterred. Of course. But still, to serve for so long, to accumulate such a legacy of victory, you are what every custodian should aspire to be. I looked at him. Really looked at him. He was young, barely a century old. His armor was pristine, unmarked by battle. His eyes were bright with belief. I am a cautionary tale, I said quietly, not an inspiration. He blinked, confused. Brother? I should have stopped there. I should have dismissed him and returned to my post. But something in me broke in that moment, some dam that had been holding back 8,000 years of bitterness. You think service is glorious, I said. You think standing watch for millennia would be an honor. You're wrong. It's a prison. You will watch everything you believe in decay. You will see the Emperor's vision twisted beyond recognition. You will stand in silence while the Imperium becomes everything he despised, and you will do nothing, because your duty is to guard, not to save, not to fix, just to stand and watch as it all crumbles. His expression had shifted to shock. Brother, such words are true, I finished. But you won't believe me, not yet. You still have faith. Hold on to it as long as you can, because once it's gone, all you have left is duty. And duty without purpose is just suffering. I walked away then, leaving him standing in the corridor, confusion and concern written across his face. I never saw him again after that. I assume he reported the conversation to his superiors. I assume there was some discussion about my psychological state, some evaluation to determine if I was still fit for service. But nothing came of it, because I am still performing my duty flawlessly. My combat effectiveness has not diminished. My loyalty, in action at least, remains absolute. What I think, what I feel, what I believe, none of that matters as long as I stand my post and kill the Emperor's enemies. So they let me continue serving. They let me continue suffering. Because that's all we are to them, tools. And as long as a tool functions, its internal state is irrelevant. I've been present for moments of great historical significance, events that are recorded in the Imperium's chronicles, that are taught to new generations, that shape the course of human history. I was there when Guilliman returned, when Call's mechanisms awakened him from stasis, when the Primarch walked the palace halls for the first time in 10,000 years. I stood watch as he entered the throne room. I saw his face when he beheld what had become of his father. I watched one of the Emperor's own sons, a demigod, a being of immense power and wisdom, break down at the sight. He wept. The Lord Regent of the Imperium, the avenging son, wept like a child. And then he saw the rest of it, the priests chanting their prayers, the incense and the candles and the religious iconography, the imperial cult's presence even here, in the Emperor's own throne room. I watched his expression shift from grief to rage. "What have you done?" he whispered. "What have you done?" No one answered. The priests continued their chants, the tech priests continued their work, and we custodians continued standing watch. Because what could we say? That we'd let it happen? That we'd stood by for 10,000 years while the Emperor's vision was corrupted? That we'd prioritized guarding his body over protecting his dream? All of that was true. And none of it mattered. Guilliman stormed out of the throne room, and I heard later that he spent hours in his chambers, alone, processing the horror of what the Imperium had become. I understood his reaction. I'd had 8,000 years to process it myself, and I still hadn't come to terms with it. But at least he could do something. As Lord Regent, he had authority to make changes, to push the Imperium toward something better, something closer to what the Emperor intended. I could only watch, only guard, only stand in silence while history happened around me. There are moments when I think about leaving, but deserting. I could never betray my duty that completely, but simply walking away, going on an extended patrol outside the palace, volunteering for some mission that would take me far from terror, far from the endless corridors and the stifling silence and the constant reminder of everything we've lost. Some custodians do this. They join the eyes of the Emperor, strike forces that venture out into the Imperium to deal with threats and gather intelligence. They see the galaxy, fight on distant worlds, experience something other than standing watch. But I don't. I remain in the palace, on my post, year after year, century after century, millennium after millennium. My bond with any mark is to the moon. Why? Because leaving feels like giving up, like admitting that the dream is dead, that there's nothing left to protect, that we're just going through the motions. As long as I'm here, as long as I'm standing watch, I can pretend that my service still means something, that I'm protecting something valuable, something worth preserving. The moment I leave, I have to confront the truth, that what I'm guarding isn't the Emperor's dream, but its corpse. So I stay, I stand watch, I endure, because I don't know what else to do. I've been trying to remember the exact moment I lost my faith. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't a single event or revelation that shattered my belief. It was erosion, gradual and relentless, like water wearing away stone over millennia. In the first centuries after the heresy, I believed that the Imperium would recover, that it was just a matter of time before we'd rebuild, reorganize, return to the Emperor's vision. The damage was catastrophic, yes, but we'd survived. We'd endure. By the end of the first millennium, I believed we were making progress. Slowly, painfully, but progress nonetheless. Guilliman's reforms were taking hold. The Codex was being implemented. Order was being restored. By the end of the second millennium, I believed we were maintaining stability. The progress had stalled, but at least we weren't declining. We were holding the line. By the end of the third millennium, I stopped believing anything at all. Because by then, it was obvious. The Imperium wasn't recovering. It wasn't progressing. It wasn't even maintaining stability. It was rotting from within, collapsing slowly under its own weight, sustained only by momentum and brutality. And there was nothing I could do about it. The imperial cult is everywhere in the palace now. Every chamber has its shrines. Every corridor has its devotional inscriptions. Every hall echoes with prayers and hymns. They worship the Emperor as a god. They pray to him for miracles. They offer him sacrifices. Not literal blood sacrifices usually, but offerings of devotion and suffering and faith. It's blasphemy. He explicitly rejected being worshipped. He spent his entire existence fighting against religion, superstition, ignorance. He wanted humanity to embrace reason, science, enlightenment. And now, he's the centerpiece of the largest religion in human history. I've listened to the priests' sermons. I've heard them describe the Emperor's divinity, his infinite mercy, his eternal love for humanity. I've heard them promise that faithful service will be rewarded in an afterlife at the Emperor's side. It's all lies. Not malicious lies. Most of the priests genuinely believe what they're preaching, but lies nonetheless, myths and fairy tales built on top of a reality they've forgotten or never knew. The Emperor didn't love humanity. Love is too small a word, too personal. He had a vision for what humanity could become, and he pursued that vision with absolute determination. We were his tools in that pursuit. Valuable tools, yes. Important tools, but tools nonetheless. And now we're using him as a tool, a symbol to control the masses, to justify atrocities, to maintain power structures that he would have torn down without hesitation. I want to scream at them. I want to tell them they're desecrating his memory, perverting his message, building exactly the kind of oppressive theocracy he spent millennia destroying. But I don't. Because I am a custodian, and custodians do not interfere in the Imperium's politics or religion. We guard the Emperor. That's all. So I stand in silence while they pray to a god who never wanted to be worshipped. and I add their blasphemy to the growing weight of everything I've lost. I remember the Emperor's imperial truth, the doctrine he spread across the galaxy during the Great Crusade, the principles that were supposed to guide humanity into a new age. No gods, no superstition, no faith, only reason, science, knowledge, and the strength to enforce them. I remember believing in it, absolutely. It made sense. It was elegant. It was right. Humanity had spent its entire history held back by religion and mysticism. The Emperor would free us from that, elevate us to our true potential. I remember the worlds we brought into compliance, the civilizations we forced to abandon their gods and their temples and their ignorant beliefs. We thought we were liberating them, bringing them enlightenment. Now those same worlds worship the Emperor as a god. The temples we tore down have been replaced with temples to him. The ignorant beliefs we eradicated have been replaced with ignorant beliefs about him. We changed nothing. We just replaced one delusion with another. And the worst part? This delusion works. The faith of trillions of humans powers the Emperor's presence in the warp. The prayers of the faithful sustain him. The Imperial cult, for all its lies and contradictions, is actually necessary now. We can't go back to the Imperial truth, even if we wanted to. The Imperium needs its god. Without the faith of the masses, the Emperor would fade from the warp, the Astronomicon would fail, and the Imperium would fragment into isolated systems within a generation. The lie has become essential, and we're all trapped in it. There's a high priest of the Adeptus Ministorum who comes to the throne room once a month, Ecclesiarch Paternoval, one of the most powerful humans in the Imperium. He leads services here, grand ceremonies with hundreds of attendees, all of them prostrating themselves before the Golden Throne. I've watched him for decades now. He's elderly by baseline human standards, probably in his second century of life, sustained by Juvenat treatments and augmetics. He moves slowly, speaks with elaborate formality, and radiates absolute conviction. He believes, truly, completely, unquestioningly believes that the Emperor is a god. That faith is humanity's greatest weapon. That suffering in the Emperor's service is the highest calling. I've listened to his sermons. He is quite eloquent. He speaks of sacrifice and duty and the necessity of suffering. He tells the congregation that their pain has meaning, that their struggles serve a greater purpose, that the Emperor sees and values their devotion. And people believe him. I see it in their faces. They find comfort in his words. They feel their suffering is validated, their lives have meaning. I envy them. I envy their ability to believe in comforting lies, because I know the truth. The Emperor doesn't see their devotion. He's barely conscious. His mind fragmented across the immaterium, fighting battles that have nothing to do with their personal struggles. Their suffering serves no greater purpose except to maintain a corrupt system that would collapse without their complicity. Their pain is meaningless except as fuel for a machine that grinds up billions of lives every year. But they believe, and their belief sustains them, and who am I to take that away from them? So I stand in silence while Paternoval preaches his lies, and I guard a god who never wanted to exist. And I try not to think about how much I've lost. I've been present during inquisitorial investigations within the palace. Not many. The palace is well protected and intensely monitored. But a few. Suspected corruption, usually. Some low-level administrator trafficking with forbidden sources, or a servant showing signs of mutation, or a scribe recording heretical texts. The inquisitors are thorough, brutal, efficient. They root out corruption with fire and fury, purging entire sections of the palace's workforce if necessary to ensure purity. I remember one investigation about 1500 years ago. An inquisitor lord named Karamazov, not the famous one, a predecessor who bore the same name, discovered a cult within the palace's lower levels. A group of menials who had been secretly worshipping chaos. corrupted by texts they'd found in some forgotten archive. The cult numbered perhaps 30 people, menials, laborers, people of no importance. Karamazov purged 3,000 people to be certain he'd eliminated all traces of corruption. 3,000 men, women and children, executed or mind-wiped, their entire families considered suspect, their associates investigated and often purged as well. I stood guard during the executions. I watched as they were brought before the inquisitorial tribunal, as they were judged, as they were led away to their deaths. Some were guilty, some were innocent. The Inquisition didn't care. Better to kill 3,000 to be certain than to risk letting corruption spread. I understood the logic. I still understand it. In a galaxy where chaos corruption can spread like a plague, extreme measures are necessary. The Imperium's survival depends on brutal purity enforcement. But I also remembered the Emperor's vision, a future where humanity would be educated enough to resist corruption through knowledge rather than ignorance, where people would understand the warp and its dangers and protect themselves through understanding rather than blind obedience. We never got there. We went in the opposite direction. We created a population deliberately kept ignorant, deliberately fed propaganda and lies, and then we slaughter them when that ignorance leads them into corruption. We're culling our own species for failures that we created, and I can do nothing but watch. I've memorized the faces of every custodian who's fallen in my presence. 17 of them, across 8,000 years. 17 brothers who died defending the palace, defending the Emperor, defending the Imperium. I remember the first, Brother Demetrius, killed during the War of the Beast when a squad of orc knobs breached the palace's outer defenses. He held a corridor against them while the rest of us fell back to a more defensible position. They tore him apart, but not before he'd killed 8 of them and bought us the time we needed to establish a firing line. I remember the most recent, Sister Kalith. We have female custodians now, a development that would have shocked the old Imperium but makes perfect sense. Killed 3 years ago when an assassin cult infiltrated the palace during a state ceremony. She intercepted the assassin meant for a High Lord, taking a poisoned blade through a weak point in her armor. She killed the assassin before the poison took her. I remember all of them. Their names, their faces, how they died. They got to stop serving. They completed their duty. They're honored in our records, their names inscribed on memorials, their sacrifices remembered. I survived them all. I survived every battle, every threat, every moment of danger. I've been wounded. Custodian armor is incredibly resilient, but it's not invulnerable. But never seriously enough to end my service. I keep serving, keep standing watch, keep accumulating kill markings while my brothers fall around me. Sometimes, I think the Emperor is punishing me specifically, keeping me alive because I doubted, because I lost faith, because I failed to maintain the absolute conviction he expects from his guardians. Other times, I think it's just random chance. I've been lucky, or skilled, or positioned in places where the threats weren't quite lethal enough. But mostly, I think it's the genetic engineering. The modifications that made us more than human also made us incredibly difficult to kill. And I'm apparently at the extreme end of that curve. My body heals faster, fights harder, endures longer than even most other custodians. I'm too perfect to die, and that perfection is my curse. Memory is supposed to fade. That's how baseline humans work. Their memories degrade over time, becoming less sharp, less painful. Events from decades past become hazy, details blur, emotions soften. Custodians don't work that way. Our memories don't fade. I remember events from 8,000 years ago with the same clarity as events from yesterday. Every face, every word, every sensation. I remember the Siege of Terror as if it's happening right now. I can still smell the burning promethium, still hear the screams of the dying, still feel the impact of bolter fire against my armor. I remember the faces of the traitors I killed, the expressions they wore as they died. I remember the day they brought the Emperor back to the palace. I remember the silence that fell across the custodians as we realized what had happened, the weight of understanding that settled over us all. I remember Dawn's face, stoic but with eyes that held such depths of grief that even we, trained to suppress emotion, could feel it. I remember the first time I heard someone refer to the Emperor as a god. A priest, barely a century after the heresy, leading a service in one of the palace's outer chambers. I remember the shock I felt, the instinctive desire to stop the blasphemy, and I remember realizing that the other humans present were nodding along, accepting it, believing it. I remember the first time I realized the Imperium would never return to what it had been. 3,000 years into my service, standing watch in the Senatorium Imperialis, while the High Lords debated whether to destroy all records of the Great Crusade's scientific achievements because they contradicted the Ecclesiarchy's teachings, they voted to do it. They burned millennia of accumulated knowledge because it threatened their religious narrative. I remember all of it, every moment of decay, every betrayal of the Emperor's vision, every compromise and corruption and failure. And I cannot forget, ever. The memories are as fresh now as they were when they happened. This is what 8,000 years of perfect memory does. It doesn't give you wisdom. It doesn't provide perspective. It just fills your mind with an endless catalogue of everything you've lost, everything that's gone wrong, everything you've failed to prevent. I am drowning in memory, and there's no relief. I've tried to find purpose beyond simple duty. I've tried to tell myself that there must be some meaning to enduring for 8 millennia, some reason beyond just guarding a corpse in a decaying empire. For a while, I convinced myself that I was preserving institutional memory, that by remembering the Emperor's actual vision, by holding on to the truth beneath the propaganda, I was keeping something important alive, that maybe someday there would be a reform, a renaissance, and people would need to know what the Imperium was originally supposed to be, but who would I tell? I can't speak out. Any attempt to contradict the Ecclesiarchy's narrative would be heresy. I'd be investigated, possibly purged, certainly removed from service. And for what? So I could tell people that their God was actually just a very powerful man with a plan that failed? That everything they believe is a lie built on top of a tragedy? They wouldn't listen. They couldn't listen. Their entire society is built on those lies. To acknowledge the truth would be to acknowledge that the Imperium is a corrupt, failing state, sustained only by momentum and brutality. And they're not wrong, exactly. The Imperium is all those things. But it's also the only thing keeping humanity alive in a galaxy that wants to destroy us. The lies are necessary. The brutality is necessary. The suffering is necessary. That's the true horror of the situation. Not that the Imperium is terrible, but that it's the best option available, that every alternative is worse, that we're trapped in this nightmare not because we're stupid or evil, but because the galaxy left us no choice. The Emperor understood this, I think. He tried to build something better, something that would elevate humanity beyond the need for brutality and ignorance. And he failed, and we're left with the wreckage. And I'm left remembering what he tried to build, what it could have been, and knowing that it will never exist. There's a chamber in the palace called the Hall of Victories. It's a vast space lined with monuments and memorials, celebrating the Imperium's greatest triumphs across 10,000 years. I've stood watch there occasionally. It's considered a prestigious posting. The chamber hosts important ceremonies and visiting dignitaries often tour it. The monuments are impressive. Statues of heroes, captured Xenos weapons, banners from defeated enemies, plaques describing battles and crusades and acts of valor. But they're all lies. Not complete lies, The battles happened, the victories were real, but the context is stripped away, the complications removed, the moral ambiguities erased. There's a monument to the Macharian Crusade. It describes Lord Solar Macharius as a brilliant strategist and devout servant of the Emperor who reconquered 1,000 worlds in 7 years. It doesn't mention that his methods often involved genocide, that he destroyed civilizations that could have been integrated, that his conquests collapsed into civil war immediately after his death. There's a memorial to the Reign of Blood, celebrating the heroism of Sebastian Thor and the faithful warriors who overthrew Goj Vandari's tyranny. It doesn't mention that Vandari was supported by the Ecclesiarchy and the Adeptus Custodes for decades before anyone acted, that we stood by while he purged billions, that we only intervened when the situation threatened the stability of the entire Imperium. There's a plaque honoring the defenders of Cadia, who held back the forces of chaos for 10,000 years. It doesn't mention that Cadia fell, that the planet broke, the system collapsed, and the Eye of Terror expanded across the galaxy. It presents the fall of Cadia as a glorious last stand rather than a catastrophic defeat. Every monument is like this. Propaganda dressed up as history, convenient lies that make the Imperium seem noble and righteous instead of desperate and brutal. And I remember the truth behind all of them. I was there for some of these events. I know what really happened. I know the compromises, the failures, the atrocities that were committed in the Emperor's name. But I say nothing. Because I am a custodian, and custodians do not correct the record. We guard. That's all. So I stand in the Hall of Victories, surrounded by lies, and I add them to my endless collection of memories that I cannot share. I've watched generations of palace staff come and go. The normal humans who work here, servants, administrators, scribes, all the support personnel necessary to keep a continent-sized palace functioning. They live short lives by my standards. 50 years, maybe 70 with Juvenat treatments, rarely more than a century. They're born, they work, they die. Their children replace them. The cycle continues. I've watched this cycle repeat 80 times. 80 generations of humans, all living their little lives in the shadow of the palace, most of them never knowing or caring about the larger forces shaping the Imperium. I envy them. Their ignorance, their mortality, the fact that they get to stop existing. They see us custodians as glorious, as blessed, as living saints who've been granted immortality in service to the God Emperor. They think we're fortunate, elevated beyond the limits of normal humanity. They don't understand that immortality is a curse, that living forever means watching everyone and everything you might have cared about die and be forgotten. That there's nothing glorious about standing in the same corridor for 8,000 years while the galaxy burns. One of them spoke to me once, a scribe, young woman, maybe 30 years old, who'd been assigned to catalogue some of the palace's historical records. She was working in a chamber where I was posted, and after several days of silence, she gathered the courage to address me. "Lord Custodian," she said quietly, "may I ask you a question?" I didn't respond immediately. We're not forbidden from speaking to the palace staff, but it's unusual. Most humans are too intimidated to approach us. "Speak," I said finally. "How long have you served?" 8,047 years. Her eyes widened. I can't even imagine. You've seen so much. The entire history of the Imperium?" "Yes." "It must be wonderful," she said almost wistfully, "to have so much experience, so much knowledge, to have been part of all those great events." I looked at her, really looked at her. She was young, earnest, filled with the kind of naive faith that the Ecclesiarchy cultivates. She genuinely thought my existence was wonderful. "It's not," I said quietly. "It's a burden. Memory is a weight, and 8,000 years of memory is crushing. You're fortunate that you'll die, that your memories will end, that you won't have to carry them forever." She looked confused, uncertain how to respond. "But you serve the Emperor. That's the greatest honor." "It's duty," I interrupted. "Not honor, duty. There's a difference." I turned away from her then, ending the conversation. She didn't speak to me again during the rest of her assignment. I sometimes wonder if she understood what I meant, if she went home and thought about what I'd said, or if she just dismissed it as the strange musings of an ancient warrior who'd seen too much battle. Probably the latter. It's easier that way. I am standing watch in the Hall of Leng, one of the palace's primary approach corridors to the Sanctum Imperialis. It's a posting I've held thousands of times over the millennia. The hall is vast, stretching nearly a kilometer from end to end, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into shadow above. The walls are adorned with murals depicting the Emperor's victories during the Great Crusade. Ulanor, the bringing of compliance to 100 worlds, the triumph over the Lair and the Diasporics. I've memorized every detail of these murals, every brushstroke, every figure. I've stood here long enough to watch the pigments fade slightly over centuries, to notice when sections were restored, to see dust accumulate in the carved details. I know this hall better than I knew my childhood home, better than I know my own face, since I rarely see my reflection. This is my existence, this hall and 1,000 others like it, standing, watching, enduring. A group of pilgrims is being escorted through on their way to the outer precincts of the throne room for a brief moment of worship. They walk with heads bowed, overwhelmed by the grandeur of the palace. Most are weeping. One of them looks up as they pass me. An old man, probably in his 80s, his face weathered and marked with devotional scars. His eyes meet mine, and I see awe and reverence there. He whispers something. I hear it clearly. Custodian hearing is far superior to baseline human. The Emperor's angel. I am not an angel. I am a prisoner in golden armor, but he'll never know that. They pass, and I am alone again in the hall. Alone with 8,000 years of memory. Alone with my doubts and my lost faith and my endless duty. As alone, I've calculated the mathematics of my existence. How much time I've spent simply standing watch versus active deployment. Out of 8,000 years of service, I've spent approximately 73 years in active combat. That's less than 1% of my existence. The rest, 99% of 8 millennia, has been spent standing in corridors and chambers and halls, watching for threats that rarely come. 7,927 years of standing still. Do you understand what that means? Can you comprehend that span of motionless time? I have stood in place for longer than most human civilizations have existed. I have been still for longer than it took humanity to progress from the invention of writing to the age of spaceflight. I am a living statue, a golden monument to a failed dream. Guilliman has been making reforms since his return, changes to the Imperium's military structure, its bureaucracy, its policies. He's pushing back against the ecclesiarchy, trying to reintroduce elements of the imperial truth, attempting to drag the Imperium towards something resembling rationality. I've watched his efforts with interest, with hope even, though I barely remember what hope feels like. But I've also watched the resistance he faces. The High Lords who sabotage his initiatives, the ecclesiarchy that resists any diminishment of its power, the Inquisition that investigates anyone who supports his reforms too enthusiastically, the vast bureaucratic inertia of an empire spanning 1,000,000 worlds. He's making progress, slowly, painfully, but progress nonetheless. And I realize that even if he succeeds, even if he manages to reform the Imperium into something closer to what the Emperor intended, it won't change anything for me. I'll still be standing watch, still guarding the Emperor's corpse, still serving in silence. Because that's what I am. A guardian, not a reformer, not a leader, not even a warrior really, just a guardian. My duty is independent of whether the Imperium is good or evil, functional or failing, true to the Emperor's vision or betraying it. I guard him, regardless. That's the final truth I've come to accept. My purpose has nothing to do with the Imperium or its condition. My purpose is simply to stand here, forever. It doesn't matter if that's meaningful or not. It doesn't matter if I believe in it or not. It only matters that I do it. I've stopped trying to find meaning. I've stopped searching for purpose beyond the immediate task of standing watch. This is all there is. This is all there ever will be. I will stand in these corridors until something kills me, and given my survival rate, that might never happen. I could serve for another 8,000 years, or 80,000, or 800,000. There's no natural limit to my lifespan, no point at which my body will simply fail. I will be here when the palace crumbles to dust. I will be here when Terra's sun dies. I will be here at the end of all things, standing watch over a corpse in a tomb, unless I fall in battle, unless some enemy finally proves strong enough to end me. I've stopped hoping for that too. Hope itself has become too painful. I simply exist. I perform my duty. I stand watch. That's all I am now. A function. A role. A position that needs to be filled. Aristeas is gone. The person I was. The sorcerer aspirant who believed in the Emperor's vision, who dreamed of being part of something great. He died millennia ago. What remains is just the duty. Just the armor and the weapon and the post. Just the guard. But sometimes, in the rare moments when my mind is still and clear, when I'm not overwhelmed by memory or bitterness or exhaustion, I remember why I accepted this duty in the first place. I wanted to serve something greater than myself. I wanted to be part of humanity's ascension. I wanted to help build a future where every human could reach their full potential. That dream is dead. It's been dead for 8,000 years. But the Emperor isn't dead. Not completely. He's still there, broken and diminished, but still fighting, still holding back the horrors of the warp, still sacrificing himself. Because what he's doing is a sacrifice, an endless dying without release for humanity's survival. And if he's still serving, still sacrificing, still fighting despite millennia of agony and isolation, then how can I do less? I am his guardian. That's what I chose to be. That's what I was made to be. And maybe that's enough. Maybe duty doesn't need meaning beyond itself. Maybe standing watch over a corpse guard in a failing empire is sufficient purpose. Not because it's glorious or righteous or meaningful, but simply because it's necessary. Someone has to guard him. Someone has to stand watch. Someone has to endure. And if it has to be someone who served for 8,000 years, who's lost everything including their faith, who's become nothing but an empty shell filled with duty and bitterness and regret, then it might as well be me. A new custodian arrives in the Hall of Leng. Brother Thalassos, recently elevated from training, taking his first watch alongside me. He positions himself across the hall, mimicking my stance perfectly. Guardian spear held at attention, armor gleaming, eyes forward, the image of perfect discipline. I see in him what I was 8,000 years ago. That certainty, that faith, that sense of purpose. I want to warn him. I want to tell him what's coming. The slow erosion of everything he believes, the gradual understanding that our service is both essential and meaningless, that we're guarding a corpse in a tomb while the dream dies around us. I want to tell him to hold on to his faith as long as possible, because once it's gone, all that's left is empty duty and an endless watch that will never end. That I don't. But I thumb through. Not likely, but I don't. Because maybe he'll be different. Maybe his faith will sustain him. Maybe he'll find meaning that I couldn't. Maybe he'll serve for 8,000 years without losing himself the way I have. Or maybe he'll fall in battle tomorrow, and he'll never have to learn what I've learned. Either way, it's not my place to burden him with my doubts. So I stand in silence across the hall from him, and we guard the Emperor together, and I say nothing. Because I am a custodian, and custodians do not spread despair. We do not weaken resolve. We serve in silence, and we endure. That's all we can do. That's all we've ever done. That's all we'll ever do. Forever. The pilgrims return, their brief audience in the outer precincts of the throne room complete. They're even more overwhelmed now, faces streaked with tears, bodies trembling with religious ecstasy. They've seen the golden throne. They've been in the presence of their God. They don't know he can't see them. They don't know he's barely conscious. They don't know that their prayers go unheard, their devotion unacknowledged. They believe, and their belief sustains them. And in a way, their belief sustains him too, powering his presence in the warp, fueling the Astronomicon, keeping humanity connected across the void. Maybe that's the final truth I've been avoiding. Maybe the Imperium doesn't need the Emperor's original vision. Maybe it just needs the faith, the belief, the willingness to suffer for something greater than ourselves. Maybe the dream dying wasn't a tragedy. Maybe it was just adaptation, evolution. The Imperium becoming what it needed to be to survive in a galaxy that wants to destroy it. And maybe my role isn't to mourn what was lost. Maybe it's just to stand here and guard what remains, no matter how different it is from what we intended to build. Maybe that's enough. I don't know if I believe that. I don't know if I can believe anything anymore. But I'll stand here regardless, because that's what I do. That's what I am. A custodian guard who can never retire. 8,000 years of service, and not a single day of rest. 8,000 years of watching the dream die, and not a single moment of hope. 8,000 years of standing in golden armor, and not a single chance to take it off. This is my reality, this is my existence, this is my curse. I am Aristeus, I am a custodian guard. I am the Emperor's loyal servant, and I am trapped in this duty forever, unable to retire, unable to die, unable to do anything but stand watch over a corpse god and a failing empire, bearing witness to the slow death of everything I once believed in. I have forgotten what it felt like to have a choice, to have a life beyond guard duty, to have a purpose beyond standing in corridors and halls. I have forgotten what hope felt like, what faith felt like, what meaning felt like. All I have left is duty, and armor, and memory, and the eternal watch. Forever. The hall is quiet now. The pilgrims have gone. The new custodian stands across from me, silent and still. The murals on the walls depict victories that feel like lies. The palace around us hums with the machinery of empire, grinding on, consuming billions of lives every year, sustained by suffering and faith and brutality. And I stand here, as I have stood for 8,000 years, as I will stand for 8,000 more, guarding a corpse, serving a failed dream, enduring an existence that has no end. This is the brutal reality of being a custodian guard who can never retire in Warhammer 40K. Not glory, not honor, not purpose, just standing watch. Forever. While the galaxy burns, while the Imperium decays, while everything that mattered slowly dies. Just standing watch, alone, in golden armor, for eternity. This is my burden. This is my curse. This is my duty. And I will carry it until the end of time. Because I am a custodian, and custodians never retire.